I got into writing by accident.
Okay.
What happened is that I was speaking at some conference, and there was this guy from Economic Times who was in the audience, and he then suggested, afterwards that why don't you? I was speaking about the cultural differences between the West and India, a few pieces, and they actually wanted me to write about city life, which is the reason why it's called City Bang.
Yeah. Oh, it's City.
City, not Chitty. No, that's the film.
It's very rare that you get a chance to have a very quick conversation with somebody like Santosh Desai. Now, besides being a GC member, a governing council member at MICA, he has been a phenomenal person, a bit of a polymath. He's been a writer who writes this excellent opinion piece called City Bang Bang. He's also somebody who is the CEO of Future Brands and has had a stellar career across his life. For me, the challenge was to actually figure out who Santosh Desai is as a writer, and therefore the topic that we chose for this episode of Two Things was not to explore him as a brand builder or as a cultural commentator, but actually explore how he writes and how it has impacted his life, his career, and maybe even his personal brand. So without further ado, let me kind of say hello to Santosh Desai. Let's go. So thank you so much for being here. It's pleasure is all mine. Trust me, I was just checking your LinkedIn profile, okay, and you have over like 462,000 followers on LinkedIn. I didn't even then dare to go to the Twitter page or anything else. I just thought, my God, this is a man who was building a personal brand even before personal brands were being built, right? And you've done it through your own inimitable style. Let me get that word correct. So if you were thinking about, you're writing this column of yours, Chitty Bang Bang, and I love a lot of what you've written. You've built your brand and you've been a cultural commentator. And what I wanted to do was maybe pick your brains on two things related to how writing helped you build whatever you were building as a social commentator, as well as your own, as well as for your own sake. So how did you do this?
I got into writing by accident.
Okay.
What happened is that I was speaking at some conference, and there was this guy from Economic Times who was in the audience, and he then suggested, afterwards that why don't you? I was speaking about the cultural differences between the West and India. I was making something like that, and he said, why don't you write an occasional column for the Economic Times for brand equity? And write an occasional column. So I wrote about 8 or 10 pieces, for brand equity over a period of a few months.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a column. It was just, I was kind of a recurring
piece
writer,
Okay, yeah.
And that actually a few years later, got picked up by Times of India, and then they asked me to write a column. Again, it was meant to be a short-term gig, to write a few pieces, and they actually wanted me to write about city life, which is the reason why it's called City Bang.
Yeah. Oh, it's City.
City, not Chitty. That's the film.
Oh, okay.
So, and they just forgot to tell me when to stop. So, it's been 20 years actually since I've been writing a weekly column, and it was meant to be city issues. I pretty much wrote about anything I felt like. So it just became like this space that was that I was allocated, where I could do what the hell I wanted. And it has now over 20 years since writing that column.
No, but what I find really amazing is that your sense of writing, you're writing very authentically. And I think because you did not constrain yourself with the topic that was around the city or whatever it was, it seems to have flowed better and you could have continued better. Would you say that is right?
Absolutely. I think it helps to have, that kind of freedom, that kind of a canvas where you're able to kind of, think about anything and write, whether it's politics, whether it's something you saw, whether it is language, whether, it's pretty much anything. I've written about the nada and its importance in Indian life, right? So I've pretty much written about all of those things, and I think it helped. But I think the key, I guess, and which is the difficult part in trying to do a weekly column, is that it doesn't make sense to write unless you have something to say.
Correct.
And therefore, to find a slant on something which you believe is worthwhile, or which anybody should be interested in, I think can often be a burden, because you can generically comment about anything. And one of the problems I have when I read a lot of so-called content, whether it is in the newspaper or otherwise, is the fact that, and particularly on LinkedIn, which God forbid is a terrible place otherwise, whether I have X number of followers or not, but because it's all obvious generic stuff, where you're just saying stuff everyone knows. Maybe you found a slightly new way of saying it, and in most cases you haven't. And I think what is the difficult part about writing is to push yourself to, at least for you to believe, even if others necessarily share that opinion or not, that you have found something new to say. You have found a new angle, you found a new way. Because if you can make people see something that they've seen otherwise in a new light, make them consider angles to it which they had not thought of before, then I think that at least you're adding some value.
So talk me through your process of writing. How does that happen? Is it like a informal thing? Do you just steal time, or something hits you, or is it over, I don't know, a drink? How does it work?
So I send my articles every Sunday, right?
Okay, so there is a timeline.
There is a timeline because they appear every Monday.
Yes.
So by Sunday 6:30 I have to send my article.
Right.
So typically what happens is that I tend to have at least 3-4 possible subjects in my mind, and they come from any place. You're talking to somebody and they say something, and it's I say, okay, maybe that's an article. So it, in that sense, one is, one has an open mind to, because the biggest pressure is thinking of a subject.
Absolutely.
Once you think of a subject, the rest actually for me flows usually quite easily. Subjects are difficult to find, particularly after 20 years of writing.
Exactly.
You kind of run dry. I mean, it really becomes a struggle. So I think finding a subject, so through the week, and what I try and do is to think of subjects and at least have 3 or 4, which I have back of my mind. What I do is that when I think of a subject, I write a few quick notes at the time I think of it, which may be used a few months later sometimes. So one is getting the subject and having an essential, what interests me about that subject kind of a notes. It could be 5 lines, it could be 6 lines, whatever, but I have a sense of it. And then on every week I decide whether a topical thing, something is, something is contemporary, and where you feel the need to respond to that, in which case you have to make up everything in that particular short time frame, to sort of have a full piece ready. So one is therefore to decide whether it's a topical piece or it's a more generic piece.
Right.
If it's a topical piece, then you kind of then you have to find an angle on it, because everybody is writing about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you need to find something that is fresh, or it connects to something else which is larger. So typically it's that kind of a process. So for instance, when India won the T20 match the way it did, right? So everybody is writing about it, right?
Yes.
So I mean, in a sense, so to me, what was interesting was, I did this piece called The Magic Millimeter, which was looking at the fact that all the triumphant narrative around it, all these people who retired in a blaze of glory. Now just imagine if, as somebody else said, if Suryakant Yadav's shoe was one size larger. Right.
It's true.
Just imagine how the narrative would have changed. The same people would have been demonized.
Yes.
They would have been hounded.
Yes.
And the fact that millimeter could make such a difference. So, and therefore the larger question of saying, what is victory, what is defeat? What is how absolutely do we view victory and defeat?
Okay.
And what is the meaning of it? If it is actually predicated on such small differences, then the enormous kind of consequences that are attached to our constructed notion of victory and defeat, are they valid? So in that sense, the from the specific to the more general kind of a perspective on saying the meaning of victory, the meaning of defeat, the fact that when we amp and hype everything to such an extent, are we setting ourselves up in some form or the other, etc.
Understood. So you were talking about writing, and what I want to understand is that you clearly have a very intuitive way of writing. It has become kind of almost instinctual, right, over a period of time, but it seems to be quite stressful in terms of all the process that's going through. Now, if I have to categorize it into thinking, and then the actual writing piece itself, and then the editing piece, right? How can you just split it, and can you tell me how you do it?
So the thinking happens like, it can happen over a period of time. You can have, so what typically I have some subjects, and it's the most difficult thing is actually to think about subjects, that because 20 years means, you pretty much run through every possible subject. So I think that is difficult. Once I think of a subject, and typically take a few notes, on the subject itself, so that when I visit it maybe a few weeks later, at least I know what I was talking about. So that is the first part. The thinking is a broad sense of what I'm talking about, where I see my view on it, or my specific way of reading it, which I think is interesting.
Yes.
So it is not writing the structure of the piece, but just writing its essence, what I think is valuable about it.
Okay.
Try to capture that.
Understood.
So that is the thinking. Then there are times when, if the subject is interesting enough, then when I'm thinking about it, there are certain phrases that come to mind. So I put down some phrases which I want to use in the piece because they are interesting, or they're So that is some kind of writing.
Right.
Just the core stuff that tickles my fancy.
Right.
Some of them I write out, and then I do the actual writing.
Right.
Then the actual writing happens. The writing takes the first draft takes about an hour or so.
Okay.
It takes that much. I do 1,000 word pieces, so that takes me about an hour.
Yeah.
And I write typically on a Saturday or something.
Yeah.
Then Sunday morning I revisit it.
Yeah.
And I'm still not editing it. I'm still writing it.
Yeah.
So I just take another look at it. I run it past my daughter is a journalist, so I run it past my wife and my daughter always. So
yes.
My younger daughter, my older daughter is not sort of involved in this part of it.
Yeah.
And depending on their suggestions, etc., I just listen to them or whatever.
Right.
Then before I send it out, I spend an hour plus editing it.
Okay.
And before sending it out. So typically I start writing sometimes on a Thursday, Friday, a little bit I'll write, feel satisfied that okay, I have got it covered for the weekend, do the actual writing on Saturday.
How much of it is cerebral and how much of it is emotional? You know what I'm saying? Like how much of it is like you're thinking through, you know how to construct this, and how much of it is like, it's just on the fly, it's moving.
Difficult to separate the two because even the cerebral bit is actually quite often instinctive. So, in that sense, it is the process is largely instinctive. Subjects determine that. So, for instance, there are subjects that are largely abstract or cerebral, and then there are experiences. So I write a lot about growing up and the middle class and and a lot of those are emotional.
Yeah, the frisky old people.
Yeah,
that was very nice, very interesting. Yeah.
So I mean, I think the emotional, depending on the subject, you dial up, one or the other.
One or the other. Okay. Is there any writer that you've actually liked? You are either consciously or subconsciously trying to, or you. The sense that I'm getting is that you perhaps don't even consider yourself as a full-fledged writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a columnist, and I have one mode of writing, right? So, if for instance, if I was asked to write fiction, I would be clueless. Right. I don't. If somebody asks me to write a 10,000 word piece, I don't like that at all. It's not my thing. That's not how I think.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I think of myself as somebody who uses writing in order to express my thoughts, and I'm my medium is the column. Right. My medium is the column, and that's what I
Yeah, so you've obviously gained a lot of fame because of this, and well deserved as well. So, besides that, how do you think writing has helped you? Has it, or is it just like something that you do?
I guess it is useful. I mean, because the fame is overrated. I have to tell you, because nobody reads nowadays. Newspapers certainly, but I think certainly there is some recognition that among the people who read, there is you have that advantage. I am not a big believer in this whole personal brand thing personally.
I wanted to,
yeah. I recognize its value, and it's useful. When you do consulting projects, and if somebody has read you, then that adds a little bit of whatever credibility, if you like. But beyond that, it's the pleasure is much more about being able to capture your own thoughts, and if somebody appreciates or resonates with that, or somebody says, if it helps open somebody's mind, to me that is what is really valuable. I mean, in that sense, in advertising, in a limited area, it's possible to be well known in that area in another way.
Of course.
So, so it's that part of it is is a bonus.
Yes.
But it's not. It is not really what drives anything, because
Right.
the truth is that I'm surprised at the number of followers I have on LinkedIn, because I don't post on LinkedIn.
I saw that too.
Only post my articles.
That's an incredible strategy. Don't post.
I don't post. I don't respond. I do nothing. I just post my articles.
Yes.
That's the only thing I do, and I think it just happens once you cross a certain threshold of followers. You know what happens is that people say, "इतने लोग अगर follow कर रहे हैं तो कुछ तो होगा इसमें." You know, so without any reason to follow, they follow you. So it's a herd instinct.
I'm sure you're being humble, but the fact is, look, you've built this, and what I consider, you've done this authentically and not trying to build a personal brand, and I think that has actually worked way more than anything else. And probably what I'm also getting is quality over just writing mindless pieces on LinkedIn. So that is something that I completely appreciate. Now, if you had to tell somebody in today's day and age, maybe a Gen Zer, okay, who's interested in this whole thing, maybe not be a full-fledged writer, but somebody who wants to explore writing, but also in the marketing / business area, not a fiction writer, what would you recommend somebody like that to? How would you approach it? What would you do?
No, so I would, the thing that I would say to anybody is that, like I said at the outset, have something to say. Writing is just a means.
How do I know that I have something?
Because
to
you have, if you see, the one thing that it's very important to have is a parallel dialogue in your mind.
That's nice.
And you must have a dialogue in your mind. You must be talking to yourself. You must have a question in your mind. To me, my favorite interview question when I'm interviewing somebody for a position is to say, what are questions in your head? Because if you're not using your job or your profession to answer questions in your head, then, I mean, that's perfectly valid, but you have a different mindset. You don't have a mindset that is trying to find new ways of thinking. You have a mindset that may be very good in operations. You may have a mindset very good in implementing things. You may have a mind in running things. But you do not have the mindset needed to think, because thinking comes out of questions.
Okay.
Unanswered questions in your head. And it's when you have the quest for answering, when you're curious and there is a quest for answering unanswered question to yourself. Other people may have answered it. But to you, that is original. To me, the word original is about anything that comes from the origin. Nice. Right? So, if the question comes to you and the answer comes to you from the origin, and then it's worth writing about.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be original in the sense that nobody else has thought of it. It has to be original in the sense
for yourself.
For yourself, it came from the origin. And that is the authenticity. That is the truth in your writing. Right? The fact that it is a question that you thought about, and then you found some sort of an answer, and you thought that answer was fresh to you. And if it isn't fresh for everybody else, then people won't read you. But at least you will be authentic. If it is fresh for other people also, you will be read. So I would say that is that and the way you have questions in your head is to challenge things. And one of the things, therefore, I find very difficult. People ask me very often, who are you influenced by, or who's a role model?
Writer.
And my answer is that I think I'm influenced by some people, but in life I don't believe in having role models. I think that is the most stultifying thing possible. Role models, particularly as people, what they do, you can admire people's actions, but when you admire people, I find it problematic. Because there are people, have many sides to them.
Correct.
And once you start believing in people, then you have to start believing in sides to them that you may not want to believe in otherwise.
Correct.
So I would much rather believe in the actions of people or the ideas of people than in people themselves. And so I think a lot of original thought comes from asking questions of people, of when somebody is speaking something, to simultaneously have the ability to be blown away by what they say when they make sense, and to be contemptuous of them when they don't.
It's quite a paradoxical thing.
You have to, but without the ability to be contemptuous of mediocrity. Right.
Yes, that's true.
It is very difficult, because you have to have your standards.
Right.
You have to believe that this is crap when it is crap. Just as it doesn't mean being cynical at all. It means that when somebody says something that, always be ready to blow your mind, but know that most people will speak crap.
Okay, one final question around this whole getting Gen Z ready for this. See, you obviously were a well-known professional who got the opportunity and the platform to write and so it worked out for you, and then you kind of really explored yourself and your authentic writing, and it worked out brilliantly. So there are clearly a lot of invisible things also that a writer, a potential writer, has to do in order to be able to be there at that stage. So how would you look at something like that, or should anyone take writing as a full-time profession in today's day and age? How would you look at it?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right.
So because it doesn't pay.
Doesn't
it pays peanuts unless you're Chetan Bhagat and you want to write that kind of stuff.
Right.
Then, you know,
Okay.
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
There's a storyteller who, you know, captivates people, you know,
Yeah.
by the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely fine. But there is only money if you're in writing, if you're doing that. And money is important, I think, in today's world, and to pretend otherwise would be foolish. So a full-time writer is you have to think through whether you really want to do that or not. But writing is extremely rewarding in many other ways. And I think I would focus on that rather than on it as a full-time profession, because I don't think that is. But the thing about writing is that, you know, the craft of it, you know, very often, and again, since I'm not a classical writer, it's only you over a period of time that you realize that how you set up something, how you set up an argument, how you know, particularly if you're making an argument which is contentious, how do you. So there are two ways of framing an argument. Either you only speak to the people who believe in the same things as you do, which is what I find most of the writing is about. You know, where you express a point of view. So if you are a liberal, you will write something which, you know, expressing outrage at something that everybody expresses outrage at.
Correct.
And that's very easy writing, I find. I mean, I don't find that readable. I may agree with that person, but I don't read that person because, you know, I know what you're going to say. So I mean, why should I read you? You know, why should I invest that time? So my own personal belief is the fact that you have to write potentially for everybody. You have to write, particularly when you're making an argument that is contentious, you have to at least write in a way that the other side also finds reason to read you. They may not agree with you. They may, but if you do not make space for you know, the other alternative points of view, then you are speaking in a vacuum and you're speaking to the converted. And to me, maybe it's the advertising background which always focuses on persuading people who actually don't really believe in you or are interested in you. But I do believe that it's important for writing to include and to have. Therefore, how do you do that? How do you say that yes, there could be other ways of looking at something, but here's why I believe that this way perhaps is the better way of looking at it. I think in particular in polarized times like today, it is very important to try and find some common ground where at least you know, you are able to get people to tune in. So I think that's one part of writing which I think is something that one has to find a way to do it.
Brilliant. Santosh Desai, what's the question that I should have asked you but haven't asked you?
None. Come on. You know, you've covered. I enjoyed this conversation, and which is, I think, always a test of the fact that you know, when the questions are great, then you know, you have a good time.
And I should say City City Bang Bang correctly now this time. On that happy note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
My pleasure.